Today, I would like to share my thoughts on analyzing the bell jar by Sylvia Plath from a feminist theory lens. Feminist literary criticism shows how literary works reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. The opening sentence of the bell jar reveals the setting for the reader and sets the tone immediately. It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. Last mention of the Rosenbergs reveals the year is 1953, which is an important time frame, especially through a feminist lens, for understanding society's attitudes towards women and how these attitudes diminish the power women have over their own lives. In the 1950s, the world's superpowers were locked in a Cold War. During this time, the American government promotes a focus on the superiority of democracy, founded on the strength of the traditional nuclear family, where men work hard and women create and maintain families in the home. In the 1950s, marriage and children were part of the national agenda. These are the expectations of women in Esther's environment. From a feminist perspective, I realize that the patriarchal environment through which Esther navigates is a huge contributor to her frustrations, her uncertainties, and her sense that she's being held back. Esther is subjected to clear expectations from the people around her. She would like to be a writer, but that is judged as impractical and temporary for her. Everyone she is close to expects that she will marry Buddy, but Buddy tells her that once they're married, she won't want to write anymore. Esther reflects, "So I began to think maybe it was true that when you were married and had children, it was like being brainwashed, and afterwards you went about numb as a slave in some private, totalitarian state." Buddy is just voicing the expectations of society, but Esther sees this future as intolerable. I think she can't imagine that marriage is a positive thing if it crushes someone's creative spirit. Her mother repeatedly tries to impress upon her that learning shorthand is not only a practical skill, but that it could make her in demand with young men. In the 1950s, women were seen as submissive and inferior beings, who were encouraged to stay home and put the needs of their families first. I see that Esther is surrounded by double standards. Buddy is a hypocrite pretending to be a virgin, while all the while he, his mother, and Esther's mother talk about how a girl should stay fine and clean for her future husband. Even articles Esther reads share expert opinions declaring how natural it is that a man's world is different from a woman's world. That men are given the freedom to be promiscuous, but women who want to be respected or get married should remain chaste. Women's sexual freedom is limited. The fact that Esther finds this idea so troublesome shows me that she disagrees with this hypocrisy. I couldn't stand the idea of a woman having to have a single pure life, and a man being able to have a double life, one pure and one not. Esther also reads how the only way to bridge the gap between men and women is through marriage. This is still a subject debated today, as seen from this tweet. I believe that Plath is showing that marriage is not necessary for humans, but it is a social construct and presented as necessary to the women in the novel. Esther feels a lot of pressure to conform to everyone's expectations. I think it is her feeling that not being able to conform makes her inadequate and inferior that really drives her mental illness. As a young woman, I would feel the same in her shoes. Many of the male characters in the novel represent stereotypical roles of power and authority. For example, Buddy wants to be a doctor, and most of the doctors that Esther encounters are male. Esther also meets a womanizer in Lenny, and an abusive woman-hater in Marco. Dr. Gordon is dismissive and brutal. I think Dr. Gordon's treatment of Esther is harsh and did nothing to advance her healing, and that his indifferent attitude to her suffering was how Plath highlights how women were treated in an inferior manner. What I see in the novel is that there are proportionately more men who exercise their power over women than those who don't, and this shows that Plath's message is that women are being oppressed by more dominant men. The men that Esther feels most at ease around are Constantine and later, Erwin. They are independent and intelligent men who appreciate Esther's company without any expectations or judgment. I think that because these two men don't exert any power over Esther, it's Plath's way of showing that a balance between the sexes is possible, and Esther experienced this balance without marriage. Again, something that is still debated today is shown in that tweet. When it comes to the women in the novel, many are shown to have varying levels of power or independence, but they are limited in some way. For example, JC is a successful businesswoman in the magazine world, but she is presented as domineering and opinionated without much of a nurturing side. She has a career, but there's not a lot of mention of her family. It is her badgering of Esther to learn foreign languages and make a plan for her future that hastens Esther's identity crisis and feelings of worthlessness. I think Esther's mother is an interesting figure in the novel, since she obviously loves Esther, but is basically forced to take on the role of the traditional male father figure of the time. She has to work, which Esther says her mom hates, to provide for her children, and she and Esther don't seem too closely aligned emotionally as a result. Esther sees her mom as a reproachful disciplinarian. I think Plath represents Esther's mom this way because it demonstrates that women can take on a role traditionally considered male. Also, in performing that role of the breadwinner, it seems to suppress or erode her emotional side, almost that since she is in that powerful role, she must remain stoic and impassive. I think the picture with the briefcase is a great visual image that makes me think of the blurring of gender roles. Esther sees women who have careers and others who are homemakers, but she does not see women who are able to achieve both, so there seems to be a cost no matter what the choice. I think Esther cannot choose a future path because she sees no option containing all of the things she would like. She uses the analogy of the fig tree to consider the options before her.
I saw my life branching out before me like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, like a fat purple fig. A wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children, and another fig was a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor, and another fig was Europe and Africa and South America, and another fig was Constantine and Socrates and Attila and a pack of other lovers with queer names and offbeat professions. And beyond and above were many more figs I couldn't quite make out. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one they plopped to the ground at my feet.
I'm happy when Esther starts to find her own voice and act out occasionally to show her feelings. What she faces as a result, however, is the constant reprimands of her mom telling her to be good. I see that there are still consequences to not conforming. The Italian woman in the hospital was brought in by her family because she couldn't help sticking her tongue out at her mother-in-law, admitted to hospital for psychiatric tests for this. By the time Esther has regained her psychological health, she has acquired the determination to act on her beliefs, even though they go against the expectations. She hates the thought of being under a man's thumb. Esther has battled back from mental illness and now starts speaking her mind and acting on her own wishes, which shows that it is possible to resist the pressure to conform. Esther wants the freedom to decide her own path without fear of judgment. When getting her contraceptive device, she mentally lists that she wants freedom from fear, freedom from marrying the wrong person like Buddy Willard, just because of sex. It was not an easy road for Esther to get to this point. She's had to survive 3 suicide attempts and time in an asylum to find the strength to realize that she holds the power over her own body. The way that the story is told through flashbacks creates the sense that all those previous experiences have been crucial learning moments for Esther. This stylistic feature of the novel reveals the idea that learning happens in stages and takes time. It takes time for Esther to sort out her beliefs in contrast to people's expectations of her. Near the end of the novel, she states, "I remembered everything," and maybe forgetfulness, like a kind of snow, should numb and cover them. But they were part of me, they were my landscape. For Esther, learning how to push back against oppressive and limiting demands is a gradual process, but it is one that she eventually finds the strength to attempt. All the pain and struggle helped her find parts of her authentic self. Lastly, I think Plath's choice of the bell jar imagery is very intriguing. A bell jar is a glass apparatus used to create a vacuum in science experiments. I think the bell jar represents Esther's mental illness as she is trapped by her feelings of inadequacy that basically throw her identity into a vacuum. She also feels separated by the rest of the world. From a feminist lens, I think that the bell jar is a symbol of the oppression and restrictions placed on Esther and the other women in the story. The women may have some freedom, but they come up against the barrier of society's control and expectations, represented by the glass of the bell jar. A woman might see the possibilities beyond the glass, but she has to have significant strength to be willing to break through.